So I'm Topher, wearing a sour shirt. If anybody can tell me the country that this band hails from, I will buy you a beer across the street after the talk. I red team at a large Fortune 500. I'm a self-proclaimed vulnerability enthusiast who likes causing constructive mischief. Previously to this, I had lots of 3 letters of government fun over in a place far, far away on the East Coast where it was awful because living in Maryland. Boo. Because I'd rather be mountain biking, and the Pacific Northwest is the best place for it. So today I'm going to talk about, for the 20 minutes that I have, firstly, why you want to train offensively. And we just heard for about an hour about challenging your own biases, and this is where I'm certainly biased because I do come from more of an offensive background and am now in a position both from a product security standpoint and a more adversarial modeling standpoint of I do a lot of offensive nature, but I also want defense people to know how that behavior and that nature entails the environment so they get a better idea of how to stop it. Then I'm going to talk about CTF and this notion that I've came up with called a shooting gallery, which is a training mechanism that I've been utilizing in order to help train people offensively with. And then I'm going to go into the actual tribulations of struggles that I ran in with and things that you can do to build and deploy challenges, and then go into a little bit of infrastructure and hosting. So first of all, why train offensively? And like I said, this is where I'm a little bit biased because I do have this offensive background and mindset, but a lot of people will say, oh, well, offense is better than defense, or defense is better than offense, but I don't believe that's necessarily true, and both sides in lots of angles have to work together. And yeah, you're going to have your nation states where they're only focused with offense and you do this cat and mouse type game. But internally in an organization, I feel that the teams need to work in tandem together without going into this notion of purple teaming that we just heard is a terrible concept. But security training from an offensive standpoint I think is important in order for defenders to know and understand what attackers do. You'll get a lot of people on the defense side running EDR tools or looking through logs and trying to correlate TTPs. But without actually, understanding what tools are being used and what kind of footprints they leave in the environment, or why an attacker would want to use them from a, methodology point of view, into why they would use, this tool versus another, you really get into their mindset, and that helps you track down what they were actually going after or how they operate. So this, helps answer a couple of questions like, what do you look for in a seemingly endless cloud of logs? Or if you're doing more of, a threat model, what parts of an app could an attacker hit? Or, if you want to go back into the whole red teaming concept of, constructive thought and being more analytical, you need other people's perspectives, not just offenders or defenders, to answer that question of where can I attack? And of course, this talk isn't about offensive teams and defense teams. This is really about CTF. So capture the flag. I'm certain that a lot of people are now familiar with this since it's a concept that's being put into place across multiple security conferences and inside of organizations. But it's an informal security competition. It's the Hacker Olympics where players are competing. They're exploiting binaries or reverse engineering binaries or writing shellcode to essentially find a flag hidden in the service or on a website somewhere. You grab that, you cat it into a leaderboard, and then you win points, and the hacker with the most points was the best hacker in that particular case. Of course, it demonstrates proficiency or excellence in one particular area. Like if you look at the CTF that I'm currently running here, most people are attacking the web side because web is, the current hotness, and that's where everything's really being attacked from an initial point of view. But then there's other areas of exploitation or CTF such as binary, cryptography, programming that are often overlooked in these competitions. And this is where, as an organizer, you really get to choose which areas are being stressed over for a particular event. So in ours, we did a 4x4, so 4 shellcode, 4 binary, 4 web, and 4 reverse engineering. There's others where it's entirely web or entirely binary driven. Or if you look into how DevCon does, where it's this attack defense model, it's a lot of forefronted services, and then behind those there's more vulnerabilities, and it's more of a full-fledged systems view as opposed to you're just getting into a web service with SQL injection or landing a buffer overflow. So that kind of brings into the types. So there's Jeopardy, which you've seen the show, you kind of know what that entails. That's what we're doing here at B-Sides. And then there's the attack and defense, where teams are attacking each other's services in some contained environment. There's another concept beyond that, which is called boot to root, which is exactly as the name suggests. And this has really become popular with VulnHub and now Hack the Box, which if you haven't heard of it or are playing it, it's a fantastic resource that just hosts a bunch of boot to root exercises, and you can go through the full initial access to a box all the way down to getting root on the machine, and it's a great learning opportunity. But these are intentionally vulnerable. And if you want to take it into how I help train people that are on defensive to think offensively, they like this whole cyber kill chain aspect. And one thing that I really like attributing to this is you have this, enumeration model where you nmap the host, and then you do vulnerability discovery to see, what's listening on it. Maybe it's vulnerable Tomcat or something. And then you do your initial access, your exploitation. And then the big part of boot to roots is there's a privilege escalation concept. Because, you boot it, you get onto it, and then you got to root it. So there's, typically a CVE that's off the shelf that you can use. And these are, if you've ever played around with the OSCP, the penetration testing with Kali Linux course that Offensive Security offers, this is exactly what those are. So I briefly mentioned the kill chain, and, this is where you can really question my biases as somebody that does offensive. But I like kind of relating this to the defense teams because they really, it clicks when they're playing a boot to root of, okay, you're at this phase. You've done your enumeration. You've done X, Y, Z. But then there's this Fusion X kill chain that kind of took the MITRE kill chain and really brought it down into, more of an adversarial view of you have this whole legacy cyber kill chain, which is like the MITRE framework. But then you do different things when you're both internal to the organization. Once you're on a box, there's things you do past that. But with boot to root, and where people are really getting a lot of, steam with this concept, is you're playing around with this internal kill chain quite a bit by solving these challenges. Which kind of comes into the shooting gallery concept, which is a form of CTF, but it's not meant to be a competition. It's meant to be a learning environment. So you take the CTF idea and you build an internal isolated playground inside of your organization to build offensive security techniques. And of course, like I said, Hack the Box is pretty much doing this, but the unfortunate part with that is inside of your organization, if you wanted to implement something like this, there's going to likely be a huge barrier to entry, whether or not it be dealing with your corporate network and allowing you to SSH outside of it without doing weird proxying, or maybe they're blocking particular ports you need to get onto these boxes. And that's not really okay, because you're not trying to teach people the intricacies of networking. You're trying to teach people how to solve exploitation problems. So I feel building something like this inside is massively useful. That also opens up a lot of mentorship capabilities because you're able to do internal tracking, monitoring of the environment, and then the mentorship process becomes a lot easier because you can go into, a conference room within your organization and just sit down, log into your infrastructure that you're the one managing, that you have full control over, so nothing's leaking outside, and you can actually, teach and get motivated and get excited about this stuff, which is really awesome to see from the defenders, because they in a lot of times are good at defense. They've never done offense, and things start to click of what they're finding when they do log correlation and whatnot. And really the thing with this is it's reducing overhead needed to get interested in this and to have an environment set up such that you're able to do it relatively effectively. In the open source implementation that I'm going to be publishing, it's really just using things like KVM and libvirt, which deployment's pretty easy, but not really because KVM and libvirt, but, you build a couple of scripts to boot a machine into the network, throw it into your isolated subnet, and then you're done, and then you just need to import more VMs or more challenges, and it's seamless. I really like using Vagrant, which is, you get base box, you spin it up, you run one command, and now you have a VM. And that's really cool too, because you get the redeployability aspect. So if somebody's, ruining a box because it's a multiplayer environment, you have the ability to really quickly revert or reload the VM and get it back to the blank state where it is exploitable. And then the implementation I'm using, which I'll publish, is this whole notion of you use OpenVPN and you privately connect into a subnet. So this is the thing too, right? You don't want to have intentionally vulnerable machines in your network. That's ridiculous. We know not to do that. So what you do is you can take a server, put an open VPN server on top of it, have everybody log into that, and then it does firewall rules such that when you're connected into the open VPN as a client, you're now in a virtual environment that you can't break out of, and all of your VMs are hosted in that private environment. So this makes it, from an organizational standpoint and looking at what the security risk of having intentionally vulnerable security problems in the network, that goes away. There's a couple of things that you will need to be wary of, though, because you're going to have this restart service in a tunnel in your private subnet. You're not going to be able to, as a player, and this is kind of where I attribute the PWK and OSCP course as a huge inspiration, because they allow you, because it's a multiplayer environment, to restart services with the click of a button. You need to implement that such that when 3 people are owning the same box and somebody does something dickish in their root and then they make it not solvable anymore, you can be like, well, no, restart, and now it's solvable again. And that solves the problem of this multiplayer environment model. You also, if you want to track progress, but not in a way that you construe it as competitive, you need some sort of leaderboard. And I really like using CTFD for that, which is also what the CTF here is using this year. So I have source code for this. It's going to be published shortly after B-Sides. I'm still waiting on open source approval, but it'll be at this GitHub link, and I'll tweet it out if you follow me on Twitter. So as far as playing, building, and deploying challenges go, participating in CTFs, and I've talked to a lot of people at this conference in the past and at other conferences where it's discouraging. You see people at DevCon playing in the CTF room, and it's a bunch of really smart people that have been doing this for years that are writing the tools that you use to solve CTF challenges. And it's there is a barrier to entry such that people that don't necessarily have these skills are intimidated by it. But really, just do it. There's a lot of really excellent baby's first challenges. Like if you've never exploited a buffer overflow before, there's, especially in our CTF even, you can go through and read Aleph 1's paper, understand how it works, and then land that exploit on our leaderboard and get a flag. The whole notion of every CTF having this barrier to entry, I think, is percuted in the community is, oh yeah, people that play CTFs are really good, or the challenges are really hard. It doesn't need to be that way, and I feel B-Sides is a really good environment to have more intermediate and amateur challenges that target beginners and not just people that are super elite at DevCon CTF. With that said, it is a good idea as a challenge organizer to have challenges that are going to be hard and unsolvable, such as this year, Pwn 400, and I'm going to talk about this in another slide with the notion of open sourcing CTF. Pwn 400 is not solvable in the way I intended it to be when I wrote it. And as I was writing it, I started thinking, well, it's a 400 level challenge. People can solve the first 3 and then get stuck on the 4th, and that's fine. With the way that I'm doing it and where I'm going to publish a solution in source code, you can go see and learn from that in a CTF that you participated in, which I think has great value. There's also some resources here where you can read. Trail of Bits actually does a fantastic job of getting people stoked on CTF and giving you very bare bones materials of here's how you get started, and I highly recommend reading those, and that's how I got started. Quite frankly, I'm not that great at exploitation, but I really like writing and playing CTF. So there's lots of resources out there for you. And that's really where creating comes in. A lot of people think, oh, the people writing CTFs must be good developers because they have all of these concepts of how the CTF is solvable and it can only be solvable in one way. And that's not true. I'm a terrible developer. I do security and red teaming. I don't know how a lot of intricacies of a lot of programming languages work. But the intention is your code needs to be intentionally vulnerable. And even if it's not vulnerable in the way you originally intended in your concept, that's still okay, because at the end of the day, if somebody can land an exploitation primitive on your service or on your binary, and they're able to actually solve it in a constructive way, that's totally fine. The way I started doing this was just by writing challenges and sending them to friends and saying, oh, can you solve this? This is how I kind of think it goes. And then they'd come back and be like, oh, no, you're an idiot. It's solvable in a totally other way. And it's like, oh, okay, that's fine. And then you learn and you keep progressing through actually being able to write these. One thing that hasn't necessarily been done, and this is something that when I was at DevCon, I met up with the challenge organizers for B-Sides San Francisco, where I really modeled a lot of what I did this year on the B-Sides PDX CTF, is the content creators aren't open sourcing or showcasing the concepts and the work of how their CTF worked. There's write-ups aplenty, and you can go, Google whatever CTF imaginable, and people are writing up how to solve the challenges. More times than not, the challenge organizers do not publish anything about how their infrastructure worked, or about how their source code looked, or about what the concepts behind before they even wrote the source code and what their intentions were. And I think that's not good for moving the community forward in building CTFs that do have this educational perspective, and I'm looking to change that with the way we're doing it this year. So I really want to see, as far as creating CTFs go, to open source challenges, show concepts, show solutions, so and this is a problem that we ran into this year too, where we didn't have time to make sure that every challenge was solvable, which is where we ran into the problem with Pwn 400. But if you publish the solutions and you prove with your team that they're solvable challenges, that really moves the event forward. Really, as far as creating goes, the first step is get involved. People that are organizing these things they're not going to be mad at you for wanting to learn or to want to get involved. It's open and it's super awesome and appreciated. So if you're interested in creating, come up and talk to me or any organizers that helped out this year, or at other B-sides or other CTFs, and mention that, hey, I have this idea for a challenge, I'd like to implement it for your CTF, and that would be totally awesome. Like I said, I'm going to open source the CTF as well, and I'll tweet that out. The CTF ends at 4:30, right before closing ceremonies, and I'm going to push it pretty much right as ceremonies start, and you can start viewing the source of how all the challenges worked. So as far as infrastructure and hosting goes, this is really the most painful part of CTF, and this could be a talk in itself. The first CTF I really organized, I did it in VMs, and I gave people, .ovas. And I was talking to a guy that's like, oh yeah, I solved all of your challenges. And I'm like, oh great, how did you get the flags? Oh, I booted into single user mode as root and catted flag. It's like, oh. So yeah, if you want to cheat, you're not going to learn the way that it was intended. But also by giving people the opportunity to think, oh, VM, single user mode, that kind of is defeating the intention of it. So moving beyond that, I ran a CTF where I was giving people, I ch-rooted them, I was running everything in Docker, but I didn't yet know how Kubernetes worked. So I gave people an SSH key, they logged in, and then they ran Docker commands that I was allowing them to run, and somebody broke out of it. And it's like, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that either. So now moving, to where we ran this year and last year's CTF, it's all hosted in Kubernetes in a secure way. And if you caught the B-Sides PDX 101 talk, Yusuf from Mozilla talked about how that infrastructure was ran, which is also going to be open source and will be linked to in our repo. With infrastructure and with creating CTF challenges as well, there are organizers that are open to talk about it. So one thing with LegitBS running CTF for the last several years at DevCon, Vito, now that they've stepped down after DevCon 25s, has been blogging about how their team communicated and how they built and orchestrated CTFs as a team. And it's been really valuable to see from the perspective of being a CTF organizer that didn't necessarily have the resources that we needed this year. It was me and this guy, Eric, who's sitting in the CTF room as well. We wrote all of the challenges with somewhat of a constricted time frame, and there were things that we could have done tremendously better. And it really, because of the help of Mozilla for our infrastructure, if that wasn't the case, we would have had an infrastructure that was lackluster and that could have been easily pwned because Kubernetes, it's really easy to default Kubernetes to being suck. So we're fortunate for that. With that said, this Hacker Noon article is from B-Sides SF. Like I said, I kind of modeled this after theirs because they were the first ones I really saw that open sourced all challenges, all solutions, and all infrastructure. So I took that as a huge inspiration, and they did this whole walkthrough of how when they were going through and running Kubernetes with their CTF, somebody pwned the infrastructure live, but was gracefully enough to tell them about it. But like anything, CTFs do kind of need an attack model to be done to them. What are we giving to the competitors? If they were able to break out of the cluster, what secrets are we leaking to them? Are there creds that AWS might still have in the cluster that now you can start mining Bitcoin? So you really need to think about all of these intricate problems of the infrastructural standpoint that might get in your way. Don't let that be a discouragement. Like I said, we're going to open source the infra, so you have at least a base reference to go off of, which is the intention here. So with that, I encourage everybody to play CTF. We are in the second day, and it is going to be ending at 4:30, but that's not to say that you can't come in and solve, some of the 100 level challenges that are relatively amateur, and if you're stuck on something, I can direct you to a blog post that you can read and then solve the challenge and cat your first flag and have B-Sides PDX CTF be the first time you ever scored a flag, which that's happened so far, and it's really awesome and empowering to see. So yeah, come to the event room, play, help us organize next year's. I would love to build a core organization team for the CTF to get it even bigger with more capacity and more challenges to showcase. So the kind of conclusion that I want you to derive away from this is you can, as an offensive security practitioner, really instill knowledge in the defenders in order to get them more excited about catching you or more excited about actually understanding the intricacies of how the tools they're catching work and why they're working or why they're being operated with. CTF is also a really good way to challenge yourself and grow skills in this domain. I encourage you to deploy Shooting Gallery in your organization to have this, self-contained resource within in order to train and mentor individuals, and really just go forth and hack the blank. Deployment scripts are all going to be on GitHub. I'm going to tweet the link out. CTF is going to be open sourced right as the conference ends when we give out prizes during closing. So there are people I need to thank. So CTF would not have been possible this year without the awesome team backing me. So I had Pone, PNW help me with all of the challenges, and then Yusuf and Andrew helped me out from Mozilla on doing all of the Kubernetes security I needed for the infrastructure. So that's it. If there's questions, I'd love to take them. I have like a couple of minutes left.